continue with the next GMP guideline chapter, which is production. The processes used in the production should be capable of yielding finished product which conform to their specification in a consistent manner with the premises and equipment provided. In production, manufacturing, handling of materials and product, for example, sampling, storage, labeling, dispensing, and packaging, must refer to a written procedures to make sure the production processes, the quality control, and other relevant personnel are instructed on the detailed process. These processes must be supervised by competent personnel. All materials that will be used must counter-check to avoid any wrongly issued materials. It is prohibited to run multiple manufacturing activities of other batches in one time. Each stages of the manufacturing processes should be done carefully to avoid any contamination or cross-contamination. Other than that, all materials, bulk container, major equipment, and rooms must be labeled to avoid any confusion during the manufacturing processes. Lastly, reconciliation must be conducted to make sure there is no discrepancies outside the acceptable limits. If it is happened, investigation should be conducted to rectify the discrepancies. This is a typical production flowchart from the incoming starting materials until the finished product. Production department is a complex system that accommodates various equipment, utilities, cleaning equipment, and electronic data processing system. It also a place where various processed manufacturing processes, packaging processes happen. All of the mentioned production aspects in the production must be verified to prove control of the critical aspects, and it should be documented. Any significant changes to scopes of verification need to be verified to ensure the product quality is not affected. Now we will discuss about the cross-contamination in production. Okay, I want to ask, what is the difference between the contamination and cross-contamination? Okay, contamination is a spoilage of product with unknown contaminant, while cross-contamination, or we call as mix-up, means the product is contaminated with known contaminant like paracetamol is contaminated with aspirin. Okay, that's just an example. Each stages or equipment and system pose a risk of cross-contamination. The common cause of cross-contamination is poor facility layout, poor equipment design, poor airflow extraction and HVAC, poor manufacturing process, inadequate personnel hygiene and clothing. Lastly is an inadequate cleaning process. So, how to prevent cross-contamination? There are 6 ways outlined by the GMP guidelines according to its 6 common causes discussed in previous slide. Firstly, the facility design layout should permit adequate separation of materials and components to prevent mix-up. The flow of the production processes should be considered in designing the layout to avoid any clashes of the personnel, materials, and production flow. Secondly, the equipment should be designed with smooth and inert surfaces to permit complete cleaning and to make sure no adsorbed or absorbed materials of previous batch left on or in the equipment surfaces. Thirdly, production area should have an appropriate airflow system, or commonly used system is HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system that can control environmental temperature, environmental humidity, and the purity of air. The system should also have filters in all process area, which the common example is HEPA filter, refer to the high efficiency particulate air filter, to keep the purity of air in the production areas. Airlock system is also important since it maintains the differential pressure between the clean room in the production areas. Dust extraction system is also used in the area where the powdery materials are being used, such as in the weighing area for powdered raw materials. The dust extraction system will extract out all the powders that dwelt on the air to prevent cross-contamination. The fourth prevention measures is about manufacturing processes. There should be a verified cleaning processes done in between batches, and the cleaning status and line clearance should be observed and checked before commencing a new manufacturing batch. Consideration of using closed manufacturing system also a good move to prevent cross-contamination so that any contaminants from outside of the system will got no chance to enter the processes. Other than that, application of zoning system is recommended to prevent the cross-contamination, where separation of solid and liquid or internal and external users product manufacturing processes is implemented. The fifth measure is on the cleaning process itself. It must be approved and verified that the cleaning procedure is effective to completely clean the equipment or production area. Other than the procedure, the personnel that executing the cleaning should also be trained and practice in the documentation and labeling of the cleaning status of the equipment and the production area. Quality control personnel also should routinely conduct environmental monitoring in the production area for any microbial growth. The final measure to prevent cross-contamination outlined by GMP guideline is about personnel and clothing of the personnel. The personnel themselves must be well trained in understanding the GMP principle, cleanliness, and control of entry. They also must be trained to the proper wearing of PPE. Lastly, personnel should not directly in contact with the starting material, primary packaging materials, and finished product. Gloves should be worn before handling the materials and products to prevent contamination. Now we continue with the starting materials in production. Starting materials is a raw material that are used in the manufacturing of a product. The handling and the procurement of the starting material must be done by a well-trained personnel, and the starting material should only be purchased from approved suppliers with correct specification, and it is highly recommended to purchase from direct producers. The specifications of starting materials and purchase policy should be properly discussed with supplier. The discussions should consider all aspects of production and control of the starting materials, handling, labeling and packaging requirements of the starting materials, and the discussion on the procedure of the complaint and rejection of the material. As for health supplement that usually use natural starting materials, full information of the ingredients that include information of Latin binomial, part of the ingredients used, country of origin, harvest age, and common adulterant should be clearly specified. Complete details of the supplier are also compulsory, such as the supplier's location, the company quality management system, and its accreditation or certification to make sure that the starting materials procured is of standard quality. To make sure that the mentioned requirements of the supplier are achieved, an established method in the assessment of the supplier should be available with a complete SOP that involved screening of the supplier, auditing them, evaluate, approve, and then monitored in appropriate interval. The method or the activity I mentioned just now is also known as Supplier Assessment Program or SAP, which typically involves the establishment of an approved vendor or supplier together with an alternative supplier list of the particular materials. Pre-assessment towards the supplier is also conducted in SAP prior to their inclusion in approved vendor list. After the vendor successfully listed, a periodic assessment should be done in appropriate interval by on-paper assessment as well as by on-site audit activity. Although the starting material is purchased from a approved supplier, all starting material must be inspected on the integrity of package and seal, as well as cross-checking to make sure the starting material received is in correspondence with the delivery note. After that, sampling and testing should be done and the starting material will be released after passing all the required testing. Warehouse should label the starting material stored with the product name, internal code reference, batch number from the supplier, expiry date, receive date, status of starting material, which whether it's quarantined, released, or rejected. Next, the starting materials that will be used in production must be within their shelf life and must be released by quality control department, which indicates that the starting material passed the testings. After that, by referring to the SOP or batch processing records, the weighing or dispensing of the starting material must be done by trained personnel and they must be appropriately labeled. The weigh and label starting material must be counter-checked by different personnel to minimize the errors. Water is also considered as starting materials in production. Thus, the quality of the water used in the production must be strictly controlled. It must be treated due to the variety sources of water and to minimize microbial contamination. The water treatment should also able to control the pH, remove impurities, or the tastes, and trace elements such as calcium and magnesium. Water quality monitoring and maintenance of water treatment system should be done in appropriate interval. The monitoring of water quality involves the testing of the water pH, conductivity, turbidity, total organic carbon or TOC, and microbial limit test, which consists of the total aerobic microbial content (TAMC), total yeast and mold content (TYMC), and specific microbial test to maintain its quality. Now we proceed to the processing operation. The master formula developed by the R&D team must be evaluated first for its suitability for routine processing and reproducibility. BMR, specifically batch processing records, is a guiding document followed by production personnel for every stage of manufacturing processes. What are the steps need to be followed before, during, and manufacturing processes? You can refer to the previous slide, which is slide number 30 and number 31. The quality control sampling samples should not be returned for commercialization. And then, any unusual discrepancy during the reconciliation should be investigated before releasing the batch and before proceed to the packaging operation. This is the example of oral solid manufacturing process. It started with the starting material sampling and approval by quality control and dispensing and mixing, and finish with the packaging, labeling and batch coding, finished product quality control, and product release and storage. Steps are just similar with the soft gel manufacturing process, which starting with the starting material sampling and approval by quality control, and finish with the packaging, labeling, batch coding, finished product quality control, product release and storage. The only differences is the middle part of the process, which involve the gelatin product preparation, encapsulation, drying, polishing, and drying again, and visual inspection. And now this is a typical process for liquid manufacturing. It is similar in the first and the last part, which is starting material sampling and approval by quality control, dispensing, weighing, mixing, and then finally if it is finished with the FPQC, product release and storage. We are still in the part of processing operation, but we are in the last part, which discussing about the in-process quality control or IPQC. Um, the IPQC is the checks and tests carried out during the manufacturing process. It should be done in the regular interval, which is during the process step and at the end of the process step, such as granulation, mixing, and blending. The aim of IPQC is to monitor the critical quality attributes, which is the product attributes, for example, weight, hardness, appearance, and pH. And then it also aims to monitor critical process parameter, which for example, mixing time, blending time, mixing speed or mixing RPM, environmental monitoring readings. Now we're done with the processing operation and we continue with the packaging material part of production. The handling and control of the primary and printed packaging materials are just similar to that discussed in starting material part of production chapter. The printed materials, or we call labels, must be securely stored with authorized access. This is important because the unused label is vulnerable to the occurrence of felony. It is possible that if the unused label falls into wrong people, they can do a treacherous act, for example, by putting the label onto the packaging with adulterant to bring down your company. That's just an example. Let's get back to our real discussion here. For the loose printed materials, to avoid any mishap, it must be stored and transported in separate container. The issuance of packaging material must only be done by authorized personnel with the guidance of SOP. Warehouse should also appoint a specific ID number for each batch of printed packaging materials or primary packaging materials to enable the process of the history tracing smooth. And then, for expired or obsolete packaging materials, they should be disposed by following a proof-written SOP and they must be recorded. Finish discussing about the packaging materials, now we continue with the packaging operations. Batch packaging records is a guiding document followed by the production personnel for every stage of packaging operation. The steps to follow before, during, and after the manufacturing process can be referred in the previous slide, which is slide number 32 and 33. The quantity, ID, and conformity of the packaging material upon delivery after the issuance from the warehouse should be examined against packaging instructions from the batch packaging records. The containers for filling must be cleaned before filling, and the typical step of the packaging operation started with the filling, sealing, and finish with the labeling. Any appropriate procedure that can avoid mislabeling or mix-up can be implemented. Then, the printed and embossed information on packaging materials must be clear and resistant to fading or erasing. The random check during the packaging by sampling must be conducted. And then the QC sampling sample should not be returned for commercialization. It should be condemned. And then any unusual discrepancies during the reconciliation should be investigated before the product can be released. The excess batch coded packaging materials must be condemned and recorded as according to the standard operating procedure. The excess non-batch coded packaging materials must be returned to the warehouse because it can be reused for the next batch and it should be properly tagged or recorded. The rejected packaging materials must be disposed of and recorded with the standard operating procedure. For the IPQC of the packaging operation, the IPQC is done by checking and testing during the packaging process. The IPQC is done to monitor the general. Yeah. Now we will discuss on the term reconciliation. I've mentioned this term several times at previous slides. The purpose of it is to make sure all materials have been accounted for and there is no occurrence of the errors. Reconciliation will be conducted at the end of the processing operation. So the printed or coded components such as labels, leaflets and cartons and also finished product will be reconciled at the end of their processing operation. The calculation should be based on the actual figures, and if there is any discrepancies, a thorough investigation must be conducted to solve the discrepancies and should rectify the discrepancy if it is applicable. So the tolerance is allowed in relation to the materials that can be lost during processing. For example, liquid mixing or liquid product. There is a possibility that the splashing or the spill of the liquid may occur, so that there is a tolerance that is allowed with a typical acceptable limits of 95 to 100% yield. So the equation for percentage of yield is as follows: the actual yield divided by theoretical yield multiplied by 100%. So the result will be in the percentage. So now we will discuss on the finished product in the part of production chapter of GMP guidelines. All finished products must be quarantined until authorized person release them. The person is the QC and the QA department personnel. The evaluation of finished product and documentation before release of the product for sale must be conducted. The example of the evaluation done is the environmental monitoring result, review of batch records, or we call it a BMR, that consists of the processing record and also packaging records. The retention samples are kept, stability study samples are kept, and a review of test result to determine compliance with the finished product is specification. Reconciliation discrepancy is well investigated. If there is a discrepancy, if it is within the acceptable limit, there is no investigation should be done. Now we continue with the next part of the production chapter, which is rejected components and products. All of the rejected components and products must be clearly identified and segregated in restricted areas. The rejected components and materials may be returned to the supplier as according to the discussion with the supplier and as according to the supplier's policy in the return of the rejected product. The rejected products may be reprocessed or destroyed. So the reprocessing is only permitted if the final product quality is not affected and that the specifications are met and if done in accordance with the defined and approved procedures after risk assessment involved. Okay. The need for the additional testing of any finished product which has been reprocessed must be considered by the quality control departments. Any action taken must first be approved by authorized personnel and, of course, must be recorded. Now we will discuss about the next part, which is the recovery of materials. As we discussed earlier, it is about the reprocessing of the materials, which usually involve the single raw materials or starting materials. But for the recovery of materials is the materials that have been mixed and have been processed. But we want to recover it and incorporate it into the batch of the same product. At the defined stage, whether it is in the mixing stage, the granulation stage, or the drying stage, in whichever suitable stage of the manufacture, but it must be authorized beforehand. So that the recovery must be carried out after a thorough evaluation of the risks involved and of course it should be recorded, and the need for the additional testing into which a recovered product has been incorporated shall be considered by the quality control department. Done with the recovery. So now we discuss about the return product. For the return product, it must be destroyed unless, without doubt, their quality is satisfactory. It may be considered for resale, and it also can be resold by relabeling or only after they have been critically assessed by quality control department in accordance with the standard operating procedure. So the assessment takes into account about the nature of the product, any special storage conditions it requires. For example, if the return product should be kept in the 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, but it has been exposed to the extreme environment like room temperature, it may be spoiled. Okay. So the other assessment is about its condition and its history, and then the last one is the time elapsed since it was issued. Okay, okay, that's all from me. That's all that we should discuss in the manufacturing compliance of nutraceutical product. So this is the references that I've been used to discuss with all of you. First one is the ASEAN guidelines, and the second one is the NPRA guidelines on the GMP for traditional medicine and health supplements. Thank you.